This is the inaugural lecture for our new spring semester. So you're here for the first, and thank you for being here. We'll be hearing from Eugene Ahn and Elizabeth Preger. Our next lecture will be February 26th, Raul de la Sota, so mark it in your calendars. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. I'm Laurel Paley, and I'm the chair of Visual Media Arts with our vice chair, Daniel Marlos, who's really the chair of Media Arts. I'm the chair of Visual. And so how many of you found out about this lecture from your professors? How many of you heard about it on Instagram? A couple people, great. If you're not on our Instagram, please do follow us, lacc.vama, V-A-M-A. And anybody find out about us from Facebook? Any Facebook finders? Okay. And anybody seen the posters? You found out from posters? Couple people from posters? Great. So we'd like to know how you found out about us. Thank you. And we'd like to thank a few people without whom we probably wouldn't have a lecture series. So first, I really want to thank Alex Wiesenfeld, our previous chair, and Elizabeth Preger and Tarina Williams. Elizabeth, who's also speaking, and Tarina, who are sort of in the background making all this work. This lecture series is also funded in part by the LA City College Foundation, so we thank them. Graphic design was done by Ian Roberts, so a federal work study student, so I guess we have to thank the feds as well. And I want to thank all of the faculty and staff at the Visual Media Arts Department. So I am going to, however, turn this over to Daniel Marlos, my esteemed colleague of photography, who would like to start by introducing Elizabeth Preger, and I'll be introducing Eugene Ahn.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for coming. I am so incredibly thrilled to be able to introduce Elizabeth Preger to you. A lot of you know her because she's the instructional assistant here in photography, but we have had a relatively long relationship together. Elizabeth enrolled in my beginning photography class in 2005 when we were in the other building. And I was really, really surprised to find out almost towards the end of the semester that she was 15 years old. And she was so incredibly talented and so incredibly mature. And I am just, again, absolutely thrilled to have been a part of her early education in photography. She took, I believe, 4 courses with me here before deciding to transfer to UCLA. I believe she had a 4.0 average here at Los Angeles City College. And at that point in time, I don't even think she had turned 18 yet. She was applying to UCLA. And I found out that we were living in the same neighborhood, and I suggested that she run for a youth representative spot on our neighborhood council, because I said the state schools love to see civic engagement. So anybody that's planning on transferring to university, any kind of civic engagement that you can do weighs very well on the incoming universities. Then Elizabeth came back here and started studying here again, and when we had an opening for an instructional assistant, she was able to get the provisional position, which eventually became a permanent position. And I was also very proud that she was #1 in the testing portion of the hiring process, #1 on the interview process, and #1 again on the final interview. So we hired #1. So you are really lucky to have her here. I also was involved in her application process to grad school, and she recently completed her graduate training in May. And within a few months, she's already teaching. So, you know, she is just the best. I am thrilled, and I hope you enjoy her work.
Yes. Oh, I can get the light. Hi, thank you, Daniel. What an introduction. So I actually brought work that is from my days as a student here. So this is work when I was, this is from when I was 17. I was at 15, although I did start here when I was 15, and I was telling this story to another class last week, but I was homeschooled for about 3 years. My mom noticed that I just kept not wanting to go to school. And I kept sort of like being like, I'm sick, let me stay home. And so she turned to me and she was like, well, what if you just start homeschooled? What if you just do all this stuff at home? And I kind of was like, let me think about it. And I was an 11-year-old, right? And I was like, okay, yeah, I want to do that. And so I was homeschooled, and then within the world of homeschooling, there's all these different ways you could be homeschooled. You could do a curriculum at home, you could sort of like do independent study, and I was doing reading, and I found that she, you know, had left these magazines around, and there's something called Radical Unschooling. And I was like, oh, this sounds good. And I went to her and I said, you know what, I really think I should be radically unschooled. Which essentially translates to, I am doing things that are interesting, and I am growing, and I am learning through life. Like, you don't need to feed me a curriculum. I'm gonna grow and learn. And she was like, okay, yeah, you can try that, let's try that. And so I spent like a year reading books. Like, I just would go to the library and check out, you know, dozens of books and read classic literature. And then I got this itch because I was like, ugh, I have a single mom. She keeps telling me that when I turn 18, that's it, I'm not supporting you, you have to support yourself. And I was like, how do I do that? I don't know how I'm gonna do that. And so I enrolled myself at LACC. I enrolled myself at LACC, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to college. That's how you do this, go to college. And I had an appointment, there's this checklist, you know, whenever you enroll, it's like, oh, okay, you gotta go meet a counselor, you gotta do this. And so I'm meeting the counselor, and the counselor's like, okay, what's your major? And I was like 15, and I was like, oh, yeah, you need a major in college. That's right. And so I like quickly did this calculation where I was like, well, I'd like to travel, and I think photography could facilitate that, so I'm gonna say photography. And then the counselor was like, okay, so you should take a photo class. And I was like, yeah, I should take a photo class. Yeah, this is my major, right? And my very first photo class was with Daniel. And it was a beginning black and white class. And I remember, I think I didn't always make it into the showcase. So here, like if you do a really good job on your assignment, the instructor will select the work and put it up to display as sort of like, these are the excellent examples. And I didn't always make it in. And I remember that just like, that was a moment where I was like, wait, because I'd been used to being really good at academics. Like I was really like, math, English, that stuff never bothered me. Like it was really easy, it came naturally. And I think for photography, I had to really, it was harder for me. It was more of a struggle, and I think that's a big part of what drew me to it and still draws me to it as a medium. And so this work here, these are self-portraits. So these are self-portraits. This is my photo 50. So this was my independent study with Daniel. This is after we worked together for 2 years. And photo 50 is self-directed. Like you come to the professor and you have a project in mind, and then you work together, and you spend a semester making a body of work. And so this is the body of work that I came up with, which was self-portraiture, and a lot of it, looking at it, they're so kind of sad, and like they're really based on looking at these these iconic photos of women from Hollywood era, black and white, beautiful like photos. And they're some of them are experimental, like this was a double exposure. Some of them are studio, some of them incorporate photograph elements. This was a lift print. And I look back at this work and I usually don't show it because it was work that I made and it really was it was where I was at that point in time. But sometimes I look at it and I'm like, oh, I don't know where I sit with this work. But this was the work that I submitted to UCLA. So this is the work that I turned into my portfolio and used to get into UCLA. And so I had been studying photography at this point at LACC for, I think, about 2.5 years. And I got into UCLA, and I'll be perfectly honest, UCLA is one of these powerhouse art schools. I was 18, I didn't know. I really didn't know it was a powerhouse art school. I kind of knew, because Daniel was like, oh, Kathy Opie teaches there. And I was like, yeah, that's right. And I got in and I was just like, oh, wow, this is a different place. And I was a beginner, even though I had 2.5 years of experience. I get into the program, and because I hadn't really taken color photography, and their program was really a color program at the time, I was a beginner again. And so I found myself in a beginning class with people who really had never picked up a camera, who didn't know how to manipulate a camera, how to control things. And I was there too, because I didn't really know how to print color. And I went back to my comfort zone in a way, which was 35mm. And so I took these 35mm photographs of just my surroundings, really looking at color pairings, looking at light, looking at form. Then I sort of started to feel a little more comfortable. I got out the Hasselblad. I started doing weird color experiments. I went out into just a field I found somewhere where I could shoot up, and then I started throwing these cowboy boots into the air and trying to get a photo of them. Just throwing them in the air. And then I started, then I was like, okay, well, what else can I do? How else can I experiment here? And so I started doing self-portraits again. At this point, although this is a very different type of self-portrait from what you saw in my LACC days, and at this point, I'd also, I changed my look a little, cut some hair off. I did this image, which is a multiple exposure of 9 photographs. This was a layered image of 9 photographs. And it's done with the Hasselblad, which to multiple expose the Hasselblad it's a labor of love. It's kind of more involved than most cameras. And I did these multiple exposures, and then I sort of felt like something wasn't working, and so I tried again. And this time I went to my sister, and I had her pose for me so I wouldn't have to control the camera and take the photograph. And I had her move, and this is, I believe, 10 exposures. So this is 10 exposures layered onto this one piece of film. And she became this hydra, this sort of creature emerging from her bedroom. Yeah. And then this was sort of this was the series. This was her moving away, moving in. And then there was this other space, because it was, I think in my practice, and I think you all are going to see this a lot tonight, in my practice I do a lot of experimentation. I really do identify my practice a lot in terms of how a scientist will work, where there's a hypothesis or an idea, and then I will do a lot of material things to manipulate the medium, to try and create this sort of image. And a lot of times in that experimentation, there's a lot of failure, right? Some of these things that I'm showing you right now, I would sort of maybe put into that category, but I also think that within failure, I was listening to something recently, and I think failed, how fantastic. And I really do, I take that to heart. Like, I think for me, taking risks, taking leaps, and creating these experiments is such a big part of my practice. And every time something doesn't work out, something goes wrong, or I sort of do something and I'm just like, well, that was, what happened here? What am I doing here? There's always something that I glean from it. There's always like a way that it helps me understand more pointedly what it is I'm trying to do and what it isn't, or how I could translate or, reiterate, like what could I try in the next version. And this project here is a series of 45 photograms that are, each of them individually is 11 by 14, and they're hung very specifically. Like, I had started this project when I was here at LACC with Daniel. He taught a experimental photography class, and in it he brought back the photogram. Like, that was one of the first things we did in that class. And a photogram, for people who are not familiar with photography, is a cameraless technique to make an image. Like, you use objects to create an image. And in this class, which was, one of the more advanced classes, he brought it back as like something where like you all did this when you first started doing your photo 10 class, and now I want you to revisit it with all the experience that you have and do something again. And so I created a series of photograms that were using lace, paper cutouts, and when I got to UCLA, I had this feeling that I created a series of 9, and I don't know, they're gone, those are lost. But I created this series of 9, and I had this feeling that that project was incomplete, that there was something about it where it was these photograms where I was flipping them, I was printing through them, I was taking one to make the next one, to make the next one. They were really iterative. Like, there was this way that each photogram led to the next. And it felt like it was incomplete, so I finally sat down and thought it through and came up with this, which was, it's highly organized. I actually sketched out every single photogram for this quilt, this photogram quilt. And every single one, like, I plotted it out, and it was organized into triangles. So there's the center triangle, which has all of these double heads that are splitting apart, and then the bottom triangle and the bottom left and the bottom right are divided into triangles. And it was me really grappling with expectations of femininity, expectations of me for myself that I would somehow manage to, because on one side there's all these heads with keys, I made all these keys out of aluminum foil, and the keys for me were really a representation of responsibility. Like, if you have keys, you have a house, you have a car, you know that key unlocks something, and the thing it unlocks comes with this responsibility, with this need to, maintain it. And then on the other side were inflated condoms with small pieces in them. And that was me being like, well, shit. Like, if you're gonna be a woman who's gonna be empowered, who wants to have motherhood in her life and have this sort of career, who's living in this post-second wave feminist world and wants to be able to somehow balance this all, it was just and the middle is all splitting apart, right? It's all these heads that are sort of growing from each other. And so this is where I started to really leap into trying to articulate and express ideas visually, trying to use allegory and symbol to articulate ideas. And so here's some close-ups. When people would ask me why I chose the colors that I did, I would sort of glibly joke that it was to match my hair at the time, which that was me, blue hair. And so from there I started getting more into sort of photograms, getting also into something that I still think of as not being photographs. So these were in fact big pieces of chromogenic paper that was black, that when you have a color processor, you have to feed material through it in order for it to keep working, essentially. And so what that means is it creates a lot of waste, because you just have sheets of paper that you feed through the processor that are really just going through it to keep it alive. They're not really photographs, they're just exposed pieces of paper. And they were huge. There were these big pieces of paper that UCLA was just feeding through the processor, basically just to maintain its health. And I thought, what a waste, you know? It's this huge piece of like chromogenic paper that's expensive. Like, what can I do with that? How can I take this material and transform it into something? And so this was, so it's that piece of black exposed paper that I then took cleaning products like bleach and Windex and sprayed it and wiped it. And what happens is then it removes some of that top layer of the emulsion and starts to reveal the under layers, which are red and orange and blue. And so I had a whole mini show of these. And I still to this day, I think these are not photographs, because for me, photography is a record of light, and this is a record of cleaning products. And so finally, you know, I'm going through this process. I'm also making like sculptures. I learned how to weld, I wrote a fairy tale. But finally, in my photographic process, I start to coalesce around an idea and really start digging into building a body of work. And this body of work is called I'm Dying to Love You Again. And so I had never left the country, really. Like, I'd never left the continent. And when I was at UCLA, I made really good friends with another student who was Thai. And he was from Bangkok, and he invited me. Like, I sort of knew him for a month, and he was like, come visit me in Bangkok. And I had this feeling like, well, yeah, I'm gonna go. And so I bought a ticket and went off to visit him in Bangkok and spent 5 weeks there and had, you know, this really, you know, for anyone who's traveled, it really is, it shakes up your worldview when you're in another place where linguistically, you know, the language around you is so different, everything you're seeing, it's such a radical experience. And then I came back to Los Angeles to keep studying at UCLA, and I found myself really homesick. And I just was like, well, what does that mean? Like, this is my home. Like, what is that feeling of homesickness, and how do I reconnect with the city that was such a big part of my life? Like, Los Angeles was where I was born, where I was raised, where, you know, I met so many incredible friends, where I had so many experiences, where I was on the neighborhood council, you know? And this body of work was really me with my camera, finding ways to reconnect with the city and places. And I have some text that I'm going to read. I've been slipping through the streets of LA, looking for things to fall in love with again. I spilled into my favorite church, the Water and Power Gardens by my house. Maybe I'll get married here. It's been hard sleeping lately. There are so many sirens wailing. I just can't get used to it. What do you do with all those tragedies zooming past your window? Where do they go? It's the strangest thing returning to your home after a month-long hiatus. Really makes you wonder why you came back. LA is full of magic, but it's harder for me to find it lately. Where to look? I've checked in all my old stomping grounds, and there are vestiges here and there, but no explosions. Tiff walked with me to the canyon, and we watched the sunset. A man slipped past us with his silly poofed and decorated Pomeranians. He was wonderful. I wish the headshot photographer hadn't ruined the moment with his professional photo shoot. It's been so long since I've had a moment of pure perfection. It's mainly my fault. I've become so critical. Magic and perfection are so linked to faith and a willingness to immerse. I'm becoming one of those people, once so common in LA, who can't hold still long enough to realize what beauty they're drowning in. and then I'm gonna skip to the last paragraph. I got drunk and ran around swearing and making up songs. I'm thinking of writing a memoir entitled Confessions of a Budding Alcoholic. Although, for this to be true, my drinking would have to actually affect my life, and I'd probably need to get drunk more than 3 times a month. Well shit, there goes that idea. I'll just have to write a memoir that doesn't play into my need to over-dramatize. I could write about the night I broke into the Southwest Museum and found a life-size fiberglass horse. Of course I climbed onto it and watched the lights twinkle in downtown while eating a freshly picked grapefruit. Where else but in LA could you find such a magnificent absurdity? And I'd say this was the first time that writing took a really big role in my practice. And writing to this day is really important to my practice. Sometimes the writing is like this, where it's personal and diaristic. Other times, it has sort of different tones. And so this body of work, I started when I was at UCLA, graduated, and kept working on. And I kept working on it for 2 years. And then that work I kept shooting, editing, and I finally turned it into a book, into a photo book. And the photo book had the text, and this was really important for me. The text actually, it's not a foreword, it's not at the beginning, it's at the end. It's at the end and it's loose, it's a letter. So it's a letter you find at the end, and then within the text, it calls up the images that you've seen, and then you, as a viewer, get to take that text, read it, and if you like, go back to the images and see how they connect. Or if you like, you could lose it. You know, like that text had its own sort of existence. And yeah. This work, I think for the sake of time, maybe to skip through it a little bit, but this is a body of work that I do to this day, and I call it family portraits, and what I do is I have people that are significant in my life, I ask them to take their shirt off, lie face down with their head turned away from me in their bed, and then I take a photo. And so they're made into contact prints, and so the prints themselves, like they're really big right now, but the prints are actually 5x7 prints with the image being 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. So they're very small, and it was a way for me to make these relationships tangible and physical, and also to make them something that I could put in a box and take with me. So I'm Dying to Love You Again. I take that book, I finish it finally, and I moved to Bangkok. I just up and moved to Thailand because, you know, for years, even though this work was born of me wanting to reconnect with Los Angeles, and it really did accomplish that for me in a lot of ways, but it also made me realize that I wanted to go back. And so I took the book and I took this body of work, which is called Life Disappears for Me, and I printed all of these. So I had a box of prints, I had my photo book, and I had a suitcase crammed full of my clothes, and I just went to Bangkok and lived on the couch of my friend and wrote articles about art, and just, you know, was like, okay, I came here, I need to get a show. And my friend Pan told me, he was like, okay, so you want a show, you have all this stuff, you've clearly come here prepared to try and seek out an exhibition. So this is what you need to do. Here's a map of all the galleries in Bangkok. I want you to take your box of photos, and I want you to go to all these galleries, and you're gonna walk in and you're gonna say, can I talk to the curator? I'd like to show him my work. And then you'll show him your work, and then you're gonna ask for a show. I was like, and I just had this moment where I was like, no, that's not how this works. I was just like, no. And then I just sort of was like, well, I'm here in Thailand, why not? And it was monsoon weather. I moved there during monsoon weather, so there's I had a cough, and she was like, I'm gonna do cupping on you. And so I took the self-portrait, and then it was looking through my archive and finding these ways that things connected, things could have a relationship, and at the same time, at this point in my photo practice, I was really looking at artists like Marguerite Mathers and Tina Modotti and women artists who were making work in California that was in relation to these other male photographers like Edward Weston, who were really known for like women's bodies and landscape. And so for me, it was really important to rethink who was the photographer who was taking these images. And when I got the show through this like kooky series of events, I installed it almost as though it were in like a Roman temple, in that I created a frieze for the top, which were all these sky images. I had my diptych sort of eye level, and then at the end of the room, like this moment where I wanted it to have this like big immersive sort of space, I had these photos of jellyfish that I'd taken, and so I blew those up big and had those be sort of like this walk into a space, there's something up high, there's something at eye level, and then the scale changes. And then there was this photo. So I stayed in Bangkok for a little while, and then I felt like I needed to move back. And so I did. So I came back to Los Angeles, and through this experience and having this solo show of this work, I met another gallerist and another person who is Manik Siriwachapum, who's a Thai photographer, who's really well known and runs a gallery, and is really kind. And I had this sort of like feeling of being sort of like, well, you know, if you want things, you just gotta sort of like reach out. And so I asked him for a studio visit. I asked him to have a meeting. And so I went to his gallery, we sat down, like we set up a time, I came in, and I brought, like he'd already seen my show, and I brought with me the book of I'm Dying to Love You Again. And I sat down with him, and we went through the work, and we just talked. We just had this really lovely conversation. And at the end of it, I told him, okay, so I'd really like to have a show with you. And he sort of like turned to me and was like, yeah, that would be nice. And I was like, you know, I'd like it to be in July of next year, because I wanted to have time to make work, to make something, to sort of like make a new body of work for this other show. And he just was like, yeah, okay, that works. And it didn't end up being in July, it ended up being in August. But in the meantime, so I knew I had the show. So I knew I had the show, and I came back to Los Angeles. And in a lot of ways, my practice dealt a lot with ideas of mortality and how photography has this history of engaging with ideas of mortality, going back to the Victorian era. And it was me unpacking that through this very personal, intimate relationship. And I had made Life Disappears for me in that vein, sort of like dealing with all these threads. And then came back and was like, well, now I need to do a new body of work, and felt like I wanted to go back to color, but I wanted to be very restricted with my use of palette. I wanted to use my own body, I wanted to do still lifes, and I wanted to really construct every single image. I wanted to build that image from the ground up. Like it was strange. I was describing this to a friend. It was almost like each of these images really was like, there was an element of sort of like, this was like a vision that I had, and I needed to make it. Like I had the image in my head, and I needed to somehow get it out into a photograph. And it wasn't me really reacting to the world at all. It was me sort of like methodically creating these photos. Like some of them, I took that photo like 10 times until I was like, okay, this is what I was after. And I have some text for this one as well. Here are my teeth, black with stars. I'm a collector. Photography provides me the ability to suspend objects, bodies, time, and space. It is a way to collect the transient, intangible fragments of life and to turn them into physical objects, talismans, to be carried around, looked at, torn up, and owned. Here are my teeth, black with stars, is a space where impulses must be followed. Impulses that have led to a cycle of looking, unpacking, trying to forget, and making objects for reasons I can't always define. This compilation of fragmented thought and experience is at once how I allow you into my world and how I keep my mortality at bay. An attempt to deal with the violence and wonder of my perishability. My body has become a stage to further explore themes of death and mortality as a type of stasis. A series of constructed gestures are intermingled with straightforward observations. There is a unique tension that arises from the conflation of an impassive image with a body in transition, not quite asleep and unknowing, yet not fully participatory. It is not just a passive or active body. It is a body that is having things done to it. Violence is a subtle undercurrent to the work and manifests itself in the use of masking and obfuscation. My photographs are both a testament to and a defense against mortality. I am a collector in constant dread and anticipation of the next moment, trying to suppress the reality that my collection will outlive me. And so in a lot of ways, that was what this work, that's what that work was for me. It was this release valve. And when I had the opportunity to install it, I sort of immediately knew, and for me, installation and the ultimate sort of way my photographs are seen in the world is really important. I tend to experiment with it a lot. And with this work, I wanted it to be essentially like an altar. And so I built a shelf, I mounted all the work, and then I had it leaning on the shelf where it also was tucked in behind itself. And so as you're moving through, looking at it, and these photographs are not that big, as you're walking around, you are physically, as the viewer, activating and discovering the work. And so they're tucked in, they're folded in, there are these big metal plates that I'd sort of patched with water. And so there's these different ways that I really was thinking about this space and how do I build a narrative visually in where I place things and how you as the viewer discover them. And it also was a space where I was really letting go of having to have a body of work look like it was all a body of work necessarily, having things be fragmented, having sort of ways that different photographs connect become more about the space in between them and in between objects. And this was one version of this work that I had the opportunity to put together in LA, and then I traveled the work to Thailand and had that show. Oh my gosh. Okay, I feel like I have to speed up because there's someone else here. So I'm going to start speeding up a little. This project was done in collaboration with Yas McCain, who's a dancer, and a lot of my work is done in collaboration. Collaboration is one of the most important parts of my practice. It keeps me going. It gives me such a thrill to work with others. And this project is called Self-Actualization in 7 Steps, which is a total tongue-in-cheek title because, can you self-actualize in 7 easy steps? Look, you stand up. Look, you sit down. Look, you cover your eyes. Really no. So it was installed as a grid to sort of have this loop of 7 poses that would self-actualize you. You just did them every morning. And it was looking at how-to manuals and sort of all these different sort of this different world of sort of just here, it's quick, it's easy, you're gonna be okay. This was I mean, it's cool, you see it. This is the work that I took, and this is what I applied to grad school with. So for me, between UCLA and CalArts, I had 7 years. And so in those 7 years, I think I really transformed my practice in a lot of ways. And I think that's a real hallmark of me, for me personally, how my art practice has manifested, is that there's these periods of me breaking it apart and then pulling it back together. And then there are these bodies of work that emerge. And so when I got to CalArts, there was again, the sort of like, oh gosh, I'm in this new environment, this new situation. And so the first thing that I did is print this photograph, which is a group photo that I had taken of, so that's my older sister and that's my younger sister, and those are 2 good friends. And so the first thing I did was print this huge and put it up in my studio, because I felt like I needed to bring something into the space that felt familiar. And then again, I started experimenting and collaborating, taking photographs, and also researching. And so what I started researching was how I got there is a little, it's like a crooked path, but I started researching the bathhouse in Russia, which is called the Banya, and looking at the Banya and its intersection historically with magic, with ritual, and with resistance, with it being a space that could represent somewhere that people could go, could have physical contact. Really, a lot of my work has to do with women in contact with each other, and how that space could be a cipher for a space where people could have this resistance that was really kind of like under the surface of something. And what happened in my research, I found that the bathhouse, it was used as a tool of propaganda and socialism, but it also was used as a space where women would give birth, and in different sorts of parts of the country, it had this role, like this really deep association with it being a site that was associated with magic, with rites, with ritual. Like girls would go there in the middle of the night to scry. And so the reason I became really interested in it is because my family is from Russia, and my background in terms of my relationship to Russia is strange, because they moved here and I was born here and I was first generation. And so I grew up speaking Russian, I grew up watching socialist era cartoons, my mom would read Russian books to me, but I had this relationship to the country that was really a time capsule, and had, they fled because they were Jewish, and it was really hard to be Jewish in Russia. And then they came here, where me being Jewish was, I don't have to think about it. Like, it no longer is something that I even have to consider, whereas they had this other relationship to that identity. And the bathhouse became the cipher where it was like a space that could house that sort of like nostalgia and that sort of idea of a time capsule, or a way to maintain an identity in an oppressive society, because socialist society was really difficult. But then it also was a space that could house magic and ritual, and it could be an invitation. And so it became this like umbrella for me, where I could then take it and build an environment, build a space. And so one of the early things that I did is I got this trough and I filled it with water beads. And then I told people they could get in if they wanted to. And so people like, I would have studio visits in my studio, and it was literally like, we would just hang out with my water beads, like, sticking our arm in, and just talk about, just have conversations about what, you know, what it means to survive, what it means to like pass on something. And so what I'm showing you photos of now is my mid-residency show. So it really grew out of this like sort of like period of experimenting and coalescing around this sort of like reading and thinking and talking. And so in the show, there was this area where you had the bathtub, and one thing I have to say I really enjoy about CalArts, you don't really have to tell people, yes, you can touch this. They will touch it. I didn't really have to like proclaim, yes, you could get into the bathtub. They just got in. Because there's such a, you know, CalArts, whatever you could say about it, definitely people will dive in. And I also sort of like weaving in these things that I was talking about in terms of ritual and magic. And so I made this soap that I impregnated with hair. And I wanted to make something that was a ritualistic object, but also had a repulsion to it that would repel the viewer. Like it would sort of simultaneously attract and repel. This is called Remnants of a Ritual. And I also had this video playing that had a voiceover that started talking more about these ideas, because I wanted to make sure that when you walked in, you had this way that you could be physically activated, you could have this like, there was scent in the space, there was things you could touch, and then there was language that could help you sort of like enter into this research and these ideas that I was bringing to the space. And I also made this piece, which was, so this piece is, so in Russian it's Banya Zala, Banya Zava, Banya Buditsky. And so in socialist era Russia, little kids would chant, Lenin lived, Lenin lives, Lenin will always live. And so what I did in this class is I etched in that same phrase. However, instead of Lenin, I put in the bathhouse. And so it was this act of substitution, right? This act of substitution that's like, no, we're gonna have the bathhouse. Bathhouse is going on, bathhouse is immortal. And there was, you know, the only sort of like really formal representative photograph was this of my mother, because she was really, I mean, you know, in terms of like me having this personal and then again not so deeply personal experience with this body of work, like she was that moment that was really personal in the body of work. And she was the only one, so she's the only person holding weight in that room, you know, where you have all this other range of experiences. And portraiture is such an important part of my practice. It's something that I've always done, I continue to do, and it really goes back to me using photography as a way to honor and connect with people, and then also creating objects that are present in the world for others to sort of like see that weight they take up. This is a friend that I met at LACC. And we were tutors at the OSS. And he's really incredible. So he's been a out gay black actor for decades, right? Which is quite a feat. And as part of this work, I sat down with him and had an interview where we talked about his background, and it was just this, you know, there's something about sitting down with someone with a tape recorder or, you know, something to record the sound that gives a gravity to the conversation. But also, I feel like there's a way that he felt like he needed to say things for posterity's sake. And so, yeah. And this is another collaborative portrait that I did with a dear friend who she's in a punk band who recently, and this actually, so something I realized. So if you recall that like big photogram quote that was like me being like, oh my gosh, how can I be a mother and have an artistic life? This was something where what we talked about was her recently giving birth, and how could we create an image that was her of like the she-wolf mother, right? Like how could we take that and create this portrait? And this was fully collaborative. She had the garment made, and then we created this image, and it's, yeah, it's really caught on. Also, I like to organize shows, so this was a show of video work that I organized while I was at CalArts, and I wanted to take on the challenge of only showing videos in one room, which means that all of the sound, all of the spilled light, all of the ways that the images overlay onto each other has to be very carefully calibrated so that each video has its own weight.
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm just going to talk about this work, and then I'm going to bow out so Eugene can tell you about his work. So the bathhouse work, I was able to apply for a grant. So one of the things that exists at CalArts is the Felix Gonzalez Torres Grant. And it's a travel grant, and essentially you need to make the case to the travel grant committee that you need to go somewhere in order to deepen your practice, in order to continue making work. And it's really generous in that you don't have to make work, you just need to sort of make the case that I really need to travel in order to continue growing my practice. And the case that I made was that I was making this work about the bathhouse that was based in research, that was really about me sort of like dealing with this space that was, you know, in a lot of ways existed in a fantasy realm for me because I hadn't actually been there. And that for me to continue, it was really vitally important that I go and experience the actual place. And I got the grant, I went to Russia, and then I came back and I was like, sifting through, you know, I had like oral histories, I had documents, I had photographs, and I was sifting through all this material, trying to work through what an exhibit would be, what would be something that I could take from this and make. And what I started coalescing around were these images of trees. These images of trees that I had been taking just sort of naturally in a part of Russia called Akademgorodok, which is in Siberia, and it was built as a socialist utopia in 1958. Its name literally translates to City of the Intellectuals. So I and my family had lived there, and some family members still have an apartment. And so I started really coalescing around these images and how I could start layering them and building this forest that could talk about the simultaneity of me being both Russian and American and sort of in between, and how it could start talking about cross-pollination, migration, and people moving from one place to the next in a sort of like bigger way. And so all of these images are doubled. So there are images from Siberia, there are images from California, and so these trees were hybrid trees, where it's two layers of transparency working together, and then hung above were speakers. And I'd taken sort of like from these conversations, from these experiences, from things I'd written while I was traveling, I'd written a play. And that play I recorded in English, and then I had my mom, who's a professional interpreter, simultaneously translate it to Russian. And so there's this play that's talking about these personal experiences in these multiple languages as you're moving through this forest that's like just this hybrid. And so this is a side view. And one thing that's kind of interesting about CalArts is they have some of these exhibition spaces that are just odd. So this was literally in a hallway. which they call the L shape, but this sort of like entrance, so you walk into the main entrance into the school, and you see right down to the hallway. So there was this facade of the trees, and they're 2 feet by 10 feet, and they're hanging so that the bottoms aren't anchored. So as people move through this hallway, which is inevitable because there's so much traffic through this hallway, the trees are starting to breathe and move. There's sound coming in, and then as you start approaching it, the facade starts to break up, right? Because it's actually just these flat planes. So it's this monolith that starts to fall apart. And yeah. And then across from it was this other piece, which was a family photograph that I found of my grandfather, and I built this structure and repeated it. And the thing that was really important to me is I discovered that he was a space engineer, or he was an aerospace engineer who had made all these inventions in Siberia. And now in Siberia, the only real way that you're making things as an engineer is you're working for the military, right? And so he was inventing these things within socialist Russia. And so I found these diagrams for patents he'd gotten, and I didn't know he had these patents. And so what I did is I took some of those patents and had them etched on glass. And then I took this photo of him and printed it on transparency in different sort of densities and set it all into this wood structure. Because in this piece, what I was really trying to make physical was this memory that's shifting, this relationship that's unstable, and an image that you can't really catch it, you know? Every time you're walking around it, you're moving it, it's rippling. And then also looking at how his sort of connection to this bigger history in terms of the tension between Russia and the United States, but also my own very personal relationship to him, right? My own very personal relationship to him as my grandfather. So this is just, you really can't catch this one. And then now I'm working on, there's something called Other Places Art Fair. And so it's an art fair that's in the middle of a demilitarized zone in San Pedro. That's a Nike missile station. And this is kind of how I work, is I make a weird Photoshop collage and then I figure it out from there. And so these are images that I've been sourcing from NASA. They're missile launches from the Cold War era, and I'm trying to figure out how to use them as transparencies, how to invert them, how to insert them into this space. Nike missile sites they really only exist because of the Cold War, because they're a ring of sites that ring Los Angeles and were there to defend us should the Russians attack. And I'm trying to work through what I'll do in this space that has all this big loaded history. Thank you so much, everyone.
She took me for beginning drawing, so.
That's great.
Yeah. So I'm excited to have Eugene Ahn speak to you tonight. And I call him sort of a visionary interdisciplinarian. I don't know if you like that, but. And his work, from what I see, lives somewhere between storytelling, social justice, and web and interactive structures, including in the LA Times Magazine and KCAL TV9. And he's gotten grants from Zero Divide, the California Emerging Technology Fund, and the Rockefeller Foundation. So on behalf of LA City College, the Visual Media Arts Department, it's really an honor and a privilege to call you our colleague and to welcome you to speak tonight. Thank you, Eugene Ahn.
I'm very appreciative to guys share my work.
What do you want me to turn off the light?
Turn it off right about now. So, I am a, can't talk while typing passwords. I am a second generation Korean American. And by that I mean my parents immigrated here from Korea separately. And they met here. And they had a love child, and that's how the second generation of my family began. So my background, my deep background is one of understanding that my history and my identity come from a place that I have no experience with. And I think that's one of the things that my work isn't specifically about the Korean American experience, but the Korean American experience and the immigrant experience is definitely like an influencer for me. So I'm just going to put this up. As Laurel mentioned in her introduction, journalism and storytelling figure really big in my work. When I was trying to figure out what I might do as a productive adult, I thought journalism would be the thing for me, and I sort of headed in that direction with a lot of energy and gusto. And it wasn't actually because I thought it'd be a great career. It actually was because when I was growing up, I had a really hard time with English language. Not that I couldn't speak, I could speak fine, but the systems around understanding the English language and grammar and sentence structure and all that, it really mystifying to me. I didn't understand it at all. And I failed in school. I failed like English classes, and people told me I should know things, and how come I didn't understand. On every other level, I was somebody that people expected to succeed, but there's something about the language which never really clicked with me. And on the other side of that, I was growing up in a household where my parents spoke a language that they chose to not teach me because they thought that they should just have me focus on one language and get that down. So I was, growing up in this environment where language obviously is important, and there's obviously a lot of languages, but I wasn't really kind of getting anywhere with anything. But in school, a suggestion was made to me. I'm actually at this moment not remembering who made it to me, but I said, why don't you join the student newspaper? I said, why would I do that? I mean, why would I join the student newspaper if English is not my thing? But I did it anyway, and it actually completely turned around my experience and my relationship with language. Through experience, through working with words, through organizing and recognizing story, through meeting people and finding that language is the connector. Suddenly all my problems with English just went away. And I became so into writing and so into storytelling and meeting people. The English language and writing became a tool that allowed me to go discover all sorts of things and all sorts of people. I ended up going, when I went to UCLA, I ended up majoring in English literature, creative writing specifically, because reading wasn't enough. I had to be writing it. So, and at that same time, I couldn't just be writing it in a classroom setting or in a personal setting. I had to be doing something about it right away, so I was part of the student newspaper. So journalism was really big for me. And I even left school early to go pursue journalism. I ended up coming back and finishing school. But journalism provided me with really important worldview. And I've ended up translating that worldview. And I'm going to just put it out here. Well, journalism teaches you to observe and question things. So it teaches you to kind of try to figure out what makes a person tick, the person that you're writing about. Oops, I just erased that. It's there. So this is my, I'm also giving you a shortened version so that I hope that I, on the fly, edit enough of my presentation, enough of my lectures, so that I leave enough mystery and questions so that we have an exciting Q&A. Another thing journalism taught me was to figure out the worldview of the person, the worldview packaged in that unique person in front of me, the worldview that I don't have, that probably nobody else has, informed by past, present, and a sense of the future. And then finally, and what of it? If you manage to make these discoveries, if you can figure out what makes somebody tick, and you can empathize with a worldview, what of it? What is the story that comes out of it? What's the potential? So I had an incredible training as a human being through journalism. And somehow these things that journalism taught me kind of got transferred into kind of this world, or this topic of art. And I translated these to the following. And the reason I put these down is because this is sort of like the way I remix journalism, because I'm not a journalist anymore. But these principles, they kind of stuck with me, and when I think of my own work and when I think of work of other people, I'm always asking these questions. And what I've realized is that I ask these questions of everyone. I seek out the artist in everyone, even the person who doesn't identify themselves as an artist, because I think through my training as a journalist to look at people as people. I've gained a valuable tool to see the artist in people too. So one of the things that happened when I was working my way out of journalism is I found some limits with storytelling. That there's usually somebody doing the telling in journalism, and that's like the voice of authority, that objective voice, and there's a lot of voices that don't necessarily get represented. And so I got interested in how I might do something about that, and I ended up taking cameras. The disposable cameras, you know, those plastic disposable cameras that you throw away. I ended up collecting about 1,000 of them. And then I figured out how to make them reusable. Because it was important for me to work with something that was garbage heading to the landfill. But it was also important for me to work with something that gave a tool of telling a story to somebody who may not have that tool. So I got a bunch of these cameras and figured out a way to make them reusable. Basically, you change a couple of parts inside the camera, parts that are specifically designed by the companies that make this product so that they can't be reusable. And once you change that, then they're reusable indefinitely. I still have cameras that they've traveled around the world. many times, and they've come back. They've come back from incredible places, and they get put in the hands of people who've never experienced photography, who go into places where cameras would not really last very long, and they come back with incredible pictures. I have some pictures of a recent project that were from a refugee camp in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So they're given specifically to children. So these are cameras, these are pictures taken with Kodak FunSaver 2, reloaded with black and white film, reloaded with Tri-X 400 speed film. So that's a very versatile black and white analog film. It's got to be mixed with chemistry and then printed in a dark room. In a camera that was designed to be used once and thrown away in a landfill. I actually designed this project many years ago, hoping that Kodak would try to come after me so that I could make a big stink about, oh, you're coming after me, but these are cameras that you were going to throw away. Because one thing that I learned is that when you give people a tool that they never had before, and it doesn't cost anybody anything, and it doesn't matter, there's no risk of it being destroyed or stolen or taken as property, incredible things happen and incredible stories come out that possibly could have never existed before. I did not go to the Congo to facilitate this project. The cameras were sent with somebody who works for the UN, who was going to visit that location. And she went there and she came back. She went several times and eventually came back with enough cameras, recovered enough cameras. And we finally got these pictures processed and looked at them and just thought, wow, what incredible images. Possibly these images, given that they were taken by refugees, given that they were taken by refugees who were children, these are images that probably shouldn't have become photography. And the other thing that we learned about these images much later is that pretty much people don't live very long in a refugee camp. So pretty much every image that came back from this project was taken by somebody who is no longer with us. So I just think that there are so many incredible opportunities for people to share their story. And as an artist, it's so urgent to facilitate that. So that's a project that continues. It's been something that I've done either going to the location and facilitating or supporting on must be 5 or 6 continents. So transforming tools and changing roles, giving people a chance to change their role is really important in my work. And I don't, even though I have spent a lot of time as a journalist and as a photographer and as a web architect, I don't particularly identify with any one role. Like, if I did, then I'd probably just have a job in that field and be doing that. But I'm not interested in jobs in the field. I'm interested in taking a lot of different tools and ideas and disciplines and putting them together, questioning them at the same time, trying to create something new, or hacking my way to something that suits a particular kind of scenario. And one example of that is something I get asked to do a lot. Is I get asked to add some secret sauce, let's say, secret sauce to things. And I'll use that metaphor because a restaurant approached me once and they said, hey, we need some secret sauce for our restaurant. And I said, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. What are you guys going to do, and what is it you need? And the chef, he worked in fine dining. This was going to be his first restaurant. He basically said, I want to do LA's version of farm to table. I've worked in the $50 a plate world. I want to do it in a $15 a plate environment. This was in 2010. And I said, okay, so tell me your story. And he explained that he'd worked for one of the James Beard chefs restaurant in Los Angeles. He was the sous chef that shopped for the groceries every week in the farmer's market. So he knew all these farmers, he knew what kind of food was growing, it was really good, and he wanted to replicate that. And I said, okay, so you go to farmers markets, that's great, and you source this food that people will like for various reasons, not just the taste. Why don't you recognize also that the reason why people like this kind of food is because it makes them feel alive and that they could grow it themselves. And actually there's a huge growing culture in Los Angeles. People grow their own food. I wonder, any of you grow your own food? Just, okay. So see? What happens when people grow their own food and don't think that they have to go to the grocery store? So I told these guys, if you're going to do a restaurant, you want me to help you. You're going to take this idea of farm to table and you're going to extend it into the backyards of your customers in your neighborhood. So how are we going to do that? So the restaurant opened, they called themselves Forage, and they opened with some very unusual program, and that was that the restaurant accepted produce grown from backyard growers. Every week there would be a kind of a reverse farmer's market where people would bring their stuff to the restaurant instead of the restaurant going to some market. And strategically it's great because farmers markets feature farmers who are growing locally. So whatever a farmer locally is growing, a person who's growing something in the backyard around the same time is probably growing something similar. So the input streams of produce match, right? So from a restaurant's point of view, there's no like heavy rethinking involved. And from my point of view, it's an amazing kind of display of what happens when you take a format, a whole industry, which is designed to make us be consumers, and you create some space so that we don't have to just be consumers. You can be a creator, you can be a producer, you can be both ends of it. Which, of course, is something that happens on the internet now all the time, but it doesn't happen in the restaurant industry. They created the program, I ran the program directly for a while, and this map is not showing up here, maybe because I'm in the basement, but it caused such a stir that the city and the county and the state got involved because it's like, nobody does this. You're not supposed to do this. You're a restaurant. You're not supposed to get food from next door and then serve it to people. You can't do that. Or should you do that? And there was a whole bunch of kind of drama around that. And eventually, it was determined that that if a backyard grower got the same kind of certification that a farmer gets to go to the farmer's market, that it would be okay, because they'd basically be following the same kind of growing protocols that a farmer does at the farmer's market. So this restaurant was one of the first, possibly the first restaurant to do this in an above-board way. Foraging produce from your locality predates the restaurant industry. So restaurants were created because people were doing that. But at some point, that got rubbed out. When food production was mechanized and controlled by business. But this was like upfront. This is what we're doing. We invite you to participate. It was something new, and the restaurant got approached by a lot of people. One of those people was someone organizing a farmers market in Altadena, and they basically contacted me and said, "Hey, we need to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, how you're getting allowed to do it, and we need to copy you." I said, "Okay, I'm going to email you everything that we've done, and you can copy me." So it's like in software they call it open source. You create something and then you just give it away. This was like open source restaurant 2.0. And the Altadena Farmers Market opened a couple of years ago, and it was the first farmers market to feature home growers, and home growers are a regular part of that market. Since this restaurant basically became like this flashpoint in the news of this topic, that whole idea has really become normalized. Because a couple of years ago there was a law that was passed. It was it's called the cottage industry law, where you can make jam and do things at home and sell it. So there've been a lot of changes in law that allow for homeowners and consumers to be producers in the economy. So this thing got a lot of attention, and I found one day I was shopping on Amazon, because we're always shopping on Amazon, making use of my Prime, and I noticed that there was this film on here. I'm just going to play the start of the trailer. I don't know if the sound will work.
It will work.
It's slow, but it's still killing us.
Most of Los Angeles is actually prime growing land, former agricultural land, 4 seasons of growing, lots of sunlight. It's a secret blessing that the city is a real for.
Okay, I just wanted to show you that because I'm second to Ron Finley, and Mike Davis is also in that, and Vandana Shiva is also in that. And if you know any of these names, you know that these people, these filmmakers, were really trying to take the lid off of the story. And it was just really fun to be a part of that, to be a part of creating something at a restaurant that got that kind of attention. So I'm always very interested in finding the next step or the next possibility in anything, and understanding somebody's story is really key to that. So I'm gonna keep it short, so maybe I'll just give you 2 more little stories and then wrap it. The web is a big part of what I do. I do kind of the standard web design, development, producing that you might think happens within industry, but that's not why I do it. I'm actually interested in the internet as a tool to connect, a tool to innovate, and a tool to manifest imagination, and a tool to tap into what's going on in culture. Last year, Me Too and Time's Up was really at a certain peak, and then the Aziz Ansari thing happened, and there was this moment where he was not participating in any of the media that was out there. He was dead silent, and it just seemed weird in the internet age that somebody could manage that. So, in response to that, I made a website. Let's see. I wonder if I can actually pull it up because it'd be cool to show you guys. Oh, okay, great. It comes up. So this was you have to remember the moment here. The moment was, an article came out about him, kind of a tell-all of one of his dates gone wrong, and he just went into hiding, not saying anything. So everyone's saying, well, what does he have to say? What does he have to say? What would he say? And so I just said, I'm going to make a website that lets people say something for him. And so I found on his own social media one of his photos. So he has a history of using social media to project his message. And he had one of those things where it's write something here and I will say it for you through my poster. And so I just took that and I turned it into into a little web project. So there's a picture. You can actually type anything you want in here. And then you can click this button that says, make this happen. And it creates that. So this is an actual asset now that exists on the internet. It can be shared on social media. There is data collection that happens on this website. So this website figures out where in the world something is being, the person is using this website, the time, and there's some categorization that goes on. I just thought I would pull up a folder. I just grabbed a bunch of these submissions from the server. It's great that the internet works because I thought maybe it would work. I wouldn't be able to show you that part. Because this is not kind of something you see every day on the internet, like when you're going to Amazon or CNN. It's a specific use of the code and the way that you can program websites and the way that you can propose interactions. Through the web, through design of internet applications, I found my multilingual capacity. So even though I had trouble with English, and even though I kind of didn't learn Korean, I learned many languages. I've learned many languages that are programming languages. And it's allowed me to connect and communicate with people in the same way that a human language would. So let's take a look at some of these submissions that people created. I'm just going to pull them up at random. I don't even know what these are. Okay. So, to me, what's interesting about the web is that there's an opportunity to create collaboration between people who may not even understand the proposition. And that's what creates community, and that's what builds culture. So the internet's always doing that, whether we know it or not. What do you think? Maybe one more story?
Yeah.
I had about 5 web pieces to show you, but I'm just going to show you this one. And I'm going to go to this story here. It goes back to photography, and it goes back to this idea that I'm not a person that goes into the studio and I don't go into the cave and re-emerge out. I'm always looking for an adventure and looking for a way to apply myself. And there came a time at one point, I'm a mountaineer, so I do a lot of climbing. And there was a time where I was not able to go to the mountains, and it was affecting me mentally. And I just felt like I had to go start doing something. And I got this idea, actually, from a friend of mine, from a childhood story, a childhood image that he had, walking home from school in Marin County, going up and down those hills, going up a hill and down a hill, and as he would go up a hill, he would see the top of the Golden Gate Bridge kind of poke out in the horizon. He would go down and it would disappear. And as a child, his imagination walking home on these hills was, I wonder what it would be like to be on top of that bridge, on the bridge, and to get up on the bridge. And this is a picture from the very first climb. Up the Golden Gate Bridge. North side, northwest buttress. Suspension line looking down. It's about halfway up. So, you know, you do something once and it's an experience, but then if nobody else is doing it, then you're the expert. So I kept on climbing this thing. I probably climbed it maybe close to a dozen times. And I started climbing other bridges too. There's no one. I went to New York. New York's great because all the bridges are just all lined up. This is the Manhattan Bridge. So, completely by accident, I became an expert bridge climber. And I had a stack of photos. I shot all these photos. These are all black and white photos. Shot them on a Nikon FA with T-Max 3200 speed film. We shoot in the dark, practically handheld. And I had this stack of photos at some point, and my dad was visiting. He was in town for business, and he wanted to meet with me. I went to the Long Beach area to meet with him. And I brought these photos along because I've never shown him, anything about what I was doing. Thinking, well, he might be interested. Because when I first told my parents, they didn't believe me, actually. They thought it was such a preposterous story. So I brought a box of photos to him, met him in his hotel room, sat down, handed him the photos. This is what I've been doing. He opened the box and he started looking through, and I was very surprised with his reaction. He said not a word. We went through photos one by one, slowly, deliberately. No reaction, no response. But before he got to the last one, because I knew how many photos were in there, before he got to the last one, he started talking about his trip to America. Coming to America, getting on a boat, sailing across the Pacific Ocean, eating crackers, chasing away rats. And I thought, wow, where is this headed? What is going on? Well, it was headed right for these photos because his trip across the Pacific Ocean went under the Golden Gate Bridge, sailed into the bay, went into Oakland, and he, the boat parked in Oakland, and they got there so late at night that they didn't let them off, so they just sat there all night staring at the San Francisco skyline, just stunned. And I realized in that moment why I had done this. I'd done this because there was a story that I didn't know about, and I would have to do something in my own life, in my own work, in my own art, practice, whatever you want to call it. I had to do something on my own so that somebody else could relate and activate their own story. So yeah, back to my original questions. What makes you tick? What does your art say? What's the result of all this? You don't know until you do that thing. So that's my story.
Yeah, Eugene, I have a question on the, what's that, disease? Is that the name of the site?
Time's Up.
.com. So, .com. Okay. So, the people that complete the prompt and post it, all of these things are just archived on the site, or are they there chronologically?
Yeah, they're there, and you can kind of like, there's a way that you can kind of go through and browse. And
So my question is, have you ever censored anything that's there, or would you censor anything that's there?
Oh, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I actually have written some filtering on the back-end mechanism that, if something is flagged, it'll get flagged and then just left out. Things don't just show up. So you can't have a group just bomb the website and just start making it do whatever. You can use the website when that page returns with the graphic that's been created with your text. You have the option as the user who created it to take ownership of that image and take it off the site and do whatever you want. Post it to your social media or Facebook or whatever. But it doesn't automatically show up on the website. It gets put in a queue of like new things.
So you have to,
And then somebody, maybe not me, but a human being on behalf of the website will decide, okay, this can join the kind of the public body of participation. So yeah, there's actually a lot of stuff that doesn't join the public part.
oh,
I have a question for you too. The project you did with the disposable cameras, what's the name of it and can you find it somewhere? Is that available?
It's had a number of different names. It depends, it would get attached to a certain type of project and get a certain name. I did it here in schools here in LA. It was called the Children's Photography Workshop. I did a version of it with the Getty Research Institute. I traveled with it. I got a grant from Rockefeller Foundation.
Did you ever do that in high schools?
I've done it in high schools.
Did you
I've
do
done
it
it.
at Belmont High School?
No, but it's been done. It's been done for any people from pre-kinder to post-college, and also in non-educational settings. So in completely off-the-grid settings. It was done in the rural Philippines. It was done in a part of India where there are really no schools. It's kind of plantation kind of region.
And is this work compiled somewhere? The work that these children have?
There's not a comprehensive place for that. I did get a website name, a great website name, and I hope to put something there eventually. Throwawaycamera.com. So yeah, eventually there'll be something like at that location that will sort of tell the story of the project. The project usually gets, it's a partner element for somebody else who's doing some kind of work in a particular area, and they want to tell the story in a certain way. There's that genre of work called participant-produced media, where it's about like, the professionally trained storytellers are not the only way to tell the story. And so it's part of that genre of activity.
I have another question. When I walked in late, I noticed that you were talking about a show you had put on where you made it very, you made the space itself be something that's very, like it's as much part of the show as the rest, as actual work. When you have a space like that and you travel with the show, how do you reconcile for the differences in the actual space?
I rebuild it. Like I reconfigure. I think when I had a show, it was in LA and then I traveled it to Bangkok. It was a completely different show because the space was completely different, and I think for me, dealing with the site, with the sort of like dimensions of it, with the limits of it, it just completely changed. But the things that stayed were the viewer walked into the space, and as they walk through the space, the show shifts around them. It shifts around their perception. And so, for me, it has to change. There's some pieces maybe that don't need to change, but for the most part, when I have an exhibit, it transforms every space it's in.
There was someone in the back.
Right, so Eugene, you climbed the Golden Gate Bridge, and I'm scared of heights. And, I often think about how people could really do that kind of stuff, like climb a mountain and be really excited about it. And when I'm like at a really, like when I got on a roller coaster, I'm scared of heights, but I love roller coasters. I do this to myself. So when I'm up somewhere really high, immediately my thought just goes, shit, shouldn't have done this, I'm gonna die, something's gonna happen. I feel like you and I feel the same sensation as organisms, being at a really high place, but your thoughts are different than mine. What do you think when you're at peak so high?
Don't mess up. One thing I'll say about that is that, you know, the roller coaster experience, like climbing a bridge experience, in the roller coaster experience, you are trusting that roller coaster, and you're trusting everything that went into making that, and you're trusting the fact that people keep riding that, and so that trust allows you to suspend a whole bunch of things and enjoy being scared. In climbing, it's different. It's the opposite. You can't trust anything, but what you end up relying on is your skill set. So you have a set of skills, a whole bunch of techniques that allow you to perform certain types of activities under certain situations and, you know, in vertical space. And you've practiced that enough so that you trust those skills. You trust those skills to match up with whatever scenario you encounter. And that is like a really simple explanation of the climbing practice. And I think actually it's very similar to what an artist would say about their artistic practice.
I have a question about the last sentence you said about you don't know until you do that thing. Do you have any works that you completed and then you look back on and still didn't have answers to why you started?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think you don't get to choose. I think, you know, when you decide to intersect with the story, then we're all like nodes in this gigantic fabric of story. And we choose to touch certain points and stay in or move off. And I don't think we get to decide. I mean, we might be able to justify and rationalize and arrive at something, but I mean, I think everybody in this room knows, like, has that experience and like that sense of truth just comes down on you. And it's like water or fire. It's not from you. You know it's from something else. You can't make that happen. You simply can't be open enough and patient enough and persistent enough for that to happen to you. It could take a long time.
The next question is for both of you. Have you had moments in your practice where you had to face a truth that was so scary about yourself? And how did you My intuitive response is yes, but then when I search for a specific example, do you have something that's coming up?
My intuitive answer is yes too, so we're really on the same page on this. Yeah, I mean, especially if I think artists are always interested in, you know, expanding boundaries and challenging things and testing ideas. I mean, I love Elizabeth's sort of research approach and experimenting and failure, and those are the things that really make you look at yourself and say, I guess I don't know who I am. But that's why we have art, so we can have a way to discover who we are. And it might be through experimentation and failure and becoming shocked and that sort of thing. But those are all valid experiences. And art is such a great container, a great kind of shepherd for being able to have those experiences.
Yes, and actually, something I don't talk a lot about, but I have had my sort of tangles with mental health issues, and there was one that was really tied to an art project, And it was sort of like, in trying to find this persistence in this project to express something, it brought up something for me. And then honestly, in terms of like how I got through it, like, I think it's how I get through everything, community. And it's really about people who are in my world who I have these deep relationships with, who come through and support, and then I support them in other situations. So, yeah, I think just like as Eugene was saying, is you never really know. I think for me, in my practice, sometimes not knowing where a project is going and working through it as it comes up. And then sometimes sitting with it and still not figuring it out, and other times it coalescing around some sort of meaning or story or relationship to someone else.
Thank you. And I'm really fascinated by how it's just this collective story and experience that like artists kind of share. It's like it's happening to a certain wavelength. And I'm looking at your work and his work and my friends work here who I met through you, and just how like the way that I think of work is sort of like aligned in the same. I just call it wavelength. So thank you.
Thank you.
Did you make the sense of the bridges alone, or with somebody else?
First time I went up alone. First time I spent so much time planning, and I had a lot of specific knowledge, like in my mind. You know, think of it something, you've been thinking of doing something 9 months. Like I would lay in my bed, I would close my eyes, and I would visualize everything. I would close my eyes, and in my mind, I would get up out of bed, walk out from the bedroom, leave my apartment, go downstairs, get in my car, turn on, get on the 405. Like I visualized the drive up to the Bay Area and everything until I could do the whole thing, close my eyes, and then do the whole thing in my head. Up to the point where I had no information. Like once you're on the bridge, like I had no information. But yeah, I did it alone the first time. I actually called my friend who shared his idea with me at that time. I said, I figured it out. I know exactly how to do it. And I explained to him everything. I basically told him the story in my head, every image in sequence. And I said, I know it can be done. Do you want to come with me? And there was some silence. I was like, no way! So I did it alone. But since then, I've actually gone with other people. I've taken up people. And that adds a whole new dimension to things.
I mean, this could be a question for both of you. How do you stay like motivated to create like art in light of like this digital, social media driven like age where, say you post some work or share some work and you're just looking for immediate gratification? And, like, how do you navigate that? Or like, how would you encourage someone to navigate that?
I don't get any gratification out of social media. I think it's like here for me when I want here. I want to, not just here, I want to like do that swimming stroke out into there. So social media just gets in my way. But I think it's a great tool for what it is. If I see it as a great tool for, and not for what's out there, I can, manage and stay on task and know what's important.
Yeah, very similar. I disengage a lot because I think for me, social media can be a way to maintain connection, to know about maybe events and things, but really what fuels my practice are, one-on-one, human-to-human conversations. And it's really like, bodily, physical, in the flesh, that sort of dynamic. And social media is kind of like, I dabble, I would say, more than anything else. Just because I find the deeper dives for me are when I'm with a person, when I'm investing into an idea or when I'm mucking around with something. And I know that those are well springs for me of inspiration and persistence. And so that's what I try to focus on. And I think, you find your own well springs that are there for you. And if you could just sort of be like, all right, these things are where I could go to. And I think just nurture those.
I think there was one last question, and maybe after this question we could, there were 2 questions, and then we could wrap it up. Is that okay? 1, 2, like that? Okay.
My question is for Elizabeth. I saw your installation at CalArts, so that's probably my answer. What informs your sense of scale on the output of your work? And to follow up with your current project, which the Nike missile site, being that that's going to be obviously outside, how is your sense of, what's going to inform your sense of scale?
So when it came to that show at CalArts, I wanted to be sort of shoulder width. So you could approach the work and it would almost start to fill your field of vision, but never quite. So you could sort of like be in the space where the transparencies are literally filtering the space around you. They never encase you. When I'm thinking about this new project, it's honestly, I don't know. Like, that's why I make these sort of Photoshop mock-ups. I'll make maquettes. I'll sort of like try and work through scale in multiple ways. But in general, I think about the body and I think about what sort of relationship do I want the viewer to have to the work? Do I want it to like fill you? Do I want you to sort of be able to like stand back and assess it? Is it tiny? Is it, I really try to hone in on what do I want the person to feel like when they approach this piece.
Our last question.
You supposed to do a collaboration project, so what kind of collaboration do you like? Boss.
I mean, for me, collaborations are wonderful because it's a different perspective, different sort of like worldview, life of experiences, and I look for an openness. Like that's really the big thing is where I feel like there's a relationship where both or all or four, however many entities, there's an openness where we're all ready to listen and to sit with each other and to adjust and move together, because it really isn't about like a single voice in a collaboration. It's about this sort of like blended sort of vision, and you have to be able to listen and sort of work together in that environment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Collaboration is the key to disrupting the power structure. We live in a society that is hierarchical, that's authoritative, and there's a power over type of model that only collaboration can really address and provide an alternative. So it's very important to me.
Thank you very, very much.